Welcome to the Team Amplifier Podcast. I'm your host, Byron Sommerdahl. Here you'll be inspired by industry leaders who build flourishing tech teams. Stay tuned and prepare to be amplified.
3, 2, 1.
Hey everybody, we're here with Stephen Miracle. He's a solutions architect and an expert in integrations, customer enablement, and I have learned a lot already talking with Stephen today, and I'm excited for you all to hear what he's got to say and what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about connecting your team with the outcomes, with the clients, giving the dev team a voice, giving the clients a voice, seeing your dev teams as missionaries instead of mercenaries, and through all of that, helping them to thrive and flourish. So I'm so happy that Stephen, that you're here with us. Stephen, tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you're doing these days.
Good to talk. So Stephen Miracle, I'm actually Director of Customer Implementation for a healthcare quality organization based out of DC. And so my role for this work is to be able to get these technical digital measures and just fairly technical and challenging work into customers' environments. So working with customers and making sure that it gets implemented, integrated, and understand what the opportunities and the challenges are for that. So a lot of security, a lot of challenges with making sure that the integrations run from the end-to-end perspective, understanding what the budgets look like and the total end result there to make sure that the customer is on board, is successful, and actually using the product in a production space.
Stephen, you've been in the tech space for quite a while, more than 20 years at this point. You came from coding. So from where you are now, and thinking about where you came from in coding, how has that transition been?
Yeah, it's been a journey. So I started as a self-taught back in the 90s, building applications, and probably PHP and Perl was my first stuff back in the 90s. And then I grew from there, went to school. I've done freelancing, consulting. I ran agencies, worked with startups, and worked on the enterprise side as engineering. And one thing that I've learned is the switch from becoming a button maker to somebody that actually focuses on delivering a solution.
Awesome. And have you been able to stay up to date on your reading? You got any books that you've been reading lately that have made an impact on you?
Yeah, honestly, the books that just comes to mind as soon as possible is the books by Silicon Valley Product Group. There's a group of books there called Inspired, Empowered, Loved, and Transformed. From a product development standpoint, it changes a lot of views and a lot of thoughts on how to build a successful product.
Awesome. We're gonna some of the ideas from those books are gonna make an impact on this show a little bit. I have a feeling. So we'll come back to that in just a second. But for now, I always like to make sure that everybody knows just how human you are. And as a guest on this podcast, you kind of have to subject yourself to this. It's confession time. So you can step into my confession booth. Stephen, what is the most embarrassing mistake that you've made as a tech leader?
As a tech leader, I'm going to take us back to 2013. So some of the tech that I want to mention, it's okay in 2013 as opposed to today. I was working with an agency and we were deploying a new web application for a large car manufacturer. You would know the name if I said it. And we were the official agency on record. And what's interesting about car manufacturing and just automobiles is like they go by year. They do a release every year. And if we have a re-platform, which we were doing, we're going from an ancient Zen, PHP Zen framework into a more Laravel stack in 2013 and building it onto a CMS. We were building our own custom CMS. And we can't push back if our due dates aren't aligned with their due dates. The car manufacturer says, I am delivering these cars and this is the year, that this is the month that needs to go out. So we have a whole stack of a couple of iPad apps, a couple of websites, and just a whole platform of products that needed to be updated. Well, we weren't ready to go. It became October, and October XX date. I don't remember the exact date. And we were told we got to release the website. Well, a large international brand, we were controlling the website. We weren't ready. We were about half done. So we spent the next 72 hours straight just trying to get this app and this website up with the latest information. We did not successfully push it out there to a space where that everything was good. There was misspellings. It was a Canada site, so you had to do everything translated in English and French. There was some French on the English side, English on the French side. There was wrong cars. It was a very big deal. It took us about a week to get it cleaned up, latest information. We did not successfully push it out there to a space where that everything was good. There was misspellings. It was a Canada site, so you had to do everything translated in English and French. There was some French on the English side, English on the French side. There was wrong cars. It was a very big deal. It took us about a week to get it cleaned up. I would say that we were given several months to get the project done. And when we got the green light to go, it wasn't spur of the moment. We weren't unaware of that date. We just weren't ready. And so instead of communicating as needed, we went something into production that was not ready for production at all. So the embarrassing is that your work was not what you would want it to be.
I think I've been there. I've had situations like that too, where I would count my most embarrassing contribution to things like that was like even accepting the estimate at the very beginning. Sounds like you had a pretty ample estimate. You had a plenty of time to really get things in order and get it done. But then I'm sure you've seen this too. Like you're on a project, you're handed a time amount, like an amount of time that you need to get this finished in. Nobody actually consulted you. And maybe as a more junior leader, you might be like, yeah, well, okay, it's not really enough time, but we'll do it. We'll pull some all-nighters or whatever. And I remember thinking before that the most embarrassing thing was that I wasn't able to get it done in 50 hours. But really the embarrassing part was that I accepted the thing in the first place. I accepted a bogus, made up estimate, even against my best judgment.
I think that's the thing as a developer is that at the heart, a lot of us are people pleasers. We want to say yes. We want to have that confidence that we can do it and we believe we can do it. Yeah. And when you push up against the wall, you just say, I want to do that all-nighter. And then you realize at the end, there should have been more communication that was done.
Yeah. I think that things like that even turn us into mercenaries, using the terminology that we're talking about today. The thesis for today's episode is that we can, as tech leaders, we can help our teams to flourish by treating them and seeing them as missionaries versus mercenaries. And so your story, my story, that all reminds me of how so many projects can turn into just a breeding ground for mercenary mindset, where I'm going to show up, I'm here, I'm a hired gun, I'm just going to get it done. I don't really care about the outcomes because the company didn't care about me in the first place. So let's talk about missionaries versus mercenaries. Tell me about what you're thinking, Stephen.
Yeah, so this actually goes back to the books that I was discussing. This is a major impact on how I saw myself and how I saw myself as a tech leader in engineering departments, as well as any product departments as a whole. There's a few ways that engineering and product teams work. You can have those that are focused on features. You want to build this thing, deploy it, deliver it, build this thing, deploy it, deliver it. And it feels good to get that task in Jira or Trello or whatever from point A to point B, and you're just doing your thing. The challenge with that is that you kind of run in circles, right? You build the same thing over and over and over again. And you do not know if the end result that you're delivering is actually working for the organization or the customer downstream. And if it's not, then it can go back and you have to build it again. So I worked in fast food a long time, many years ago, at 16, and I would make burgers at this burger place. I would go make the burger, And I wasn't very good. I was also really slow. And so I'd make the burger as well as I could. I knew I made a mistake, but I put it down the line. It got it out. But then the same burger came in and I did it again. And so you just kept this repetitive process where you're building things that you're wasting your time and you're wasting the efforts of yourself and the downstream impact on the customer, which is the whole point of the mission, to get the end results. And so Mercenaries focus on just building buttons and features. Because I call buttons as this like word to say just this one thing, whereas Missionaries focus on that end result and how it impacts the customer and the user downstream. How does it benefit them? And when you focus on that you're actually building solutions to solve problems for people, it changes your whole mindset.
Yeah. And tech leaders have an immense amount of influence on this. I think tech leaders can make decisions that really can put people's fire out. And maybe people start off with this, I'm going to save the world kind of mindset, but then maybe it gets just turned off. The switch gets flipped because of decisions that the leadership has made. And then on the other side, there are many decisions that leadership can make that can foster save the world missionary kind of mindset, and seeing our dev teams as those missionaries. As you're talking about food, I used to own a restaurant, and as a programmer, I was always trying to come up with ways to make things more efficient, right? Because you're trying to save as much money. Profit margins are already bad enough as it is. So I remember some experiments that we were making. We brought somebody in and we were going to let them do like some food prep work, not really a trained sous chef or anything like that, just somebody that was going to cut some vegetables. And so I put them on the line and said, okay, here, cut these onions, cut these tomatoes. They may have asked me what they're for, and I just didn't tell them, or maybe they never asked me. Either way, that would be a failure on my part to just expect them to cut the vegetables without actually telling them what the vegetables are going into. At the end, I had actually two things that the vegetables were going in. One was a spaghetti sauce. The other was toppings for hamburgers. And I didn't tell them what the end result was going to be and what the customer wanted. And they didn't have a concept of where these onions and tomatoes were going. They were just going to cut them. They ended up being the wrong shape, the wrong size for either one, tomato sauce and they had to redo it all. And all of my efficiency went through the toilet. But as a leader, I can get better outcomes by connecting my contributors to the outcomes and help them to understand what they're about to do.
Yeah, that's true. Like whenever you think, almost goes back to the thought process of keeping the end in mind. Like you want to make sure that you want to work with those as a team. When you go from thinking you are this role, and I'm this role, and we're just creating a line, right? And manufacturing ahead your line that you're one step on that line. So if you're a button maker, you made a perfect button every time, even though that it did not call for a button, it called for something else. So let's call it a link or a image. What's the difference? There can be big implications if you're doing the same thing without the context. So knowing what the end is and having that collaboration goes back to the beginning of like communication. As much communication and collaboration you can have as a team, and thinking of even the customer as part of the team, then the impact is you're actually making a difference.
From your perspective, how do you think this impacts the flourishing of our dev teams? If we're tech leaders, we want our dev teams, our technology teams to flourish. I've already mentioned that we might get better productivity or better outcomes, spend less money, better efficiency, whatever. Those are all like bottom line kind of outcomes. But what about the outcomes for the technology team themselves? How can this impact their state of flourishing?
You have the line numbers and those business numbers, which are well and good, and they are important. They're incredibly important, even as like a flourishing aspect as an engineer. But I would say that the majority comes in the motivational aspects. Most engineers want to work at organizations that they feel good to share with their families, their friends. I work at X, Y, and Z, and we do this for this person or this group of people, and it really makes an impact. And so when you're working in an alignment with those that you're delivering to, when you think in that missionary aspect, it brings that additional motivation. So when I'm working those overtime hours just because I want to, because I know that this is going to make a difference, or when I need to step back and have that communication with the customer or those end users. So engineers are solution problem solvers as opposed to just coders. Like when you think away from the coder into a problem solver, you think that if you realize the customer has a problem, they might think about a solution a certain way, but engineers think in these optimizations that, are unique for the customer. So when you work together, it brings that whole purpose alignment to you. And you have a group of developers that are missional and want to get something done because it brings the intrinsic motivation. It brings it to a spot where things are good. And from a team, any team leader, tech leader included, intrinsic motivation is much stronger than extrinsic.
Yeah, at that point, the motivation really comes from the purpose of the product. If the developers are having trouble feeling like they are developing or creating things with purpose, then connecting them with the end result, with their clients, helping them to see what kind of impact they're making with the thing they're building will give them more purpose. And purpose just helps anybody to flourish. I don't care who you are. Why don't we see more leaders thinking of their teams as missionaries? I look around, I see a lot of tech leaders that kind of view their team members in more mercenary terms, more button maker terms. And so I think people are catching on, but let's try to convert the rest of them. Why don't you think more tech leaders are taking advantage of this side of things?
There's two primary reasons that I have come to believe. Both are inherently positive and coming from well intentions. One common thing is that developer time is incredibly important. They need that heads down time. And there was a point in time where the involvement of the customer, the project managers, the account representatives, or the product owners was so deeply integrated that the engineers didn't have a lot of time to do that development. And so there was a separation to say, all right, I need my developers to do the time, to do the work. And a lot of times tech leaders become that go-between between the product owners and the engineers to protect the engineers' time. So that's a positive reason why. So the intention is good. But then the tech leader now becomes a bottleneck because that voice has to be heard. So now the tech leader is now that bottleneck between the two. So that's a common reason why. And then the second reason is this top-down approach that, we need the engineers to be writing features and their role is to write code. Our other members here is to create the creative and bring that to the engineering. So because we want a line, right? Everybody has a spot in the line because it's the most efficient way to do it, as believed.
What do you think tech leaders often overlook when they're structuring or building dev teams or even their processes?
I think we tend to put even engineers as well as other members of product teams as a whole into boxes. We need this engineer because we need engineers to do X, Y, Z. This is the persona that we're expecting. This is who the engineer is. We think about the skills. This is the skills that we need to do, the check mark. Okay, they got the skills. There's a lot of tech leaders that do go into that personal aspect and know what this person is good at, but they don't think it's, a lot of tech leaders struggle with thinking as a holistic aspect of how does this role fit within the larger team, as well as how this different engineers think as a whole. So I've put engineers into two buckets. As of now, this is the way I think of it. You have those that are really skilled at thinking about performance and optimizations and just general platform. And then you do have those engineers who can sometimes who think more on that creative aspect, who do enjoy working with the customers as well as just overall problem solving. And when you work everybody together in a way of understanding what their strengths are, that the team as a whole can fit. So those that have a strong inclination to say, might not be the best when it comes to writing the most optimized code, but I understand what the problem is from a conceptual aspect. And then those that work together with those that are more platform or optimization focused, align themselves together with those that are more problem solving focused to create a solution. Everybody has strengths, is what I'm trying to say. Everybody has strengths, and each engineer brings their strengths to the whole as a whole.
So when we think about our dev teams, our engineers, anybody really, any technology staff, and how to help them to flourish as people, human beings, as team members, it's super clear that we can achieve that even more if we see them as missionaries versus mercenaries. It's not even a religious thing. It's just like helping them to work with purpose, helping them to see the end result, connecting them with the outcomes. And in a way, what we're talking about really is closing the gap between the devs and the clients. Stephen, tell me about a time when you saw that closing the gap between devs and clients led to some unexpected outcome.
I'll go back to a consulting opportunity that I led with an organization several years ago. I won't go into the details or names, but it was for a big fintech organization. And the team brought us on to develop a solution for their customers downstream. And this is where the negative impact happened. We were the button makers, really. Mm-hmm. We had the experience to really connect with the downstream customers, but XYZ reason, we weren't able to get connected to that customer. So we were given a project and a budget and a time frame and told, here's the things that need to be developed. They got developed, we hit the budget, everybody was happy, it got deployed. The end result, the customers' KPIs, their goals, and their downstream, what they want to accomplish, didn't succeed. So a month later, we were all heads down working those 24 hours, those much overtime to get this thing fixed and actually get the results that they wanted to get done. So that was very difficult. Yeah. Contrasting that with another initiative where we were working with another organization in a consulting space where we worked directly with the customer to understand what the problem was. So they wanted to originally build this that included this mobile app. And so this mobile app was supposed to get customers to help with their parking and different things like that. But the problem is that when we spoke to them, they weren't aware of some of the limitations of the mobile app space, as opposed to if we built a progressive web application. And so when we spoke to them that you can still do X, Y, Z without actually releasing to the app store and what the challenges of that were as a startup, as opposed to building a progressive web application where people can get to the application faster and get on board and adopt the product. They went on and become their goals, get their funding that they needed and reach success and go and continue. So those are the comparison and contrast of you get to actually mold and shape what the actual end deliverable is.
Yeah, I think you're really leading a project as a tech leader up to chance. And maybe it's just pure luck if you're not trying to help your team to think of themselves as part of the overall solution. If our dev teams are just making buttons, or if they're just cutting tomatoes and they don't know where they're going next, where their output is going next, then it could do any number of things. Things that won't get caught by QA, things that won't get caught by the client until you start to connect the dots, integrate things with other systems. And if you're out of budget, then you're toast, or just things hit the fan. I can already tell that this episode is going to make a big impact for people. And hopefully any of you listening, if you haven't considered helping your team to flourish in this way, definitely take a second look at your processes, at your team structure, how you're seeing your tech team, and help them to connect to the outcomes by thinking of themselves as missionaries, closing the gap between themselves and the clients and the outcomes. Man, Stephen, this has been great. If there's one thing that you'd like to tell tech leaders that they should do tomorrow to improve and promote team flourishing, what would it be?
I would say introduce the voice of the customer. Spend 1 hour a month just interviewing a customer, bring pictures of the customer, like actual user personas, bring them into the space of the engineers. Success stories are huge. You want to intrinsically motivate the engineers, show where their code made an impact. And there's even the testimonials makes an impact. So there's little things that you can do to step up the game with limiting still providing that space for your engineers to be heads down.
Yeah, it's awesome. So, Stephen, how can people connect with you?
Officially, I'm on LinkedIn. I think that's probably the most common. I'm also on X. You can also find me on GitHub. I've done a lot of open source work with a lot of the Docker container space as well as development there. So those are the big three probably.
Awesome. We'll put links to all of those in the show notes. Stephen, thank you so much for your time today. This has been awesome and looking forward to the next conversation.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
This has been another episode of the Team Amplifier podcast. Thanks for joining us. Now, get out there and be a team amplifier.